Hello and welcome to Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I have conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a special focus on Latin America. My guest today is Christian Henst, a Guatemalan entrepreneur who is co-founder of Platzi, a company that creates online classes for both the Spanish-speaking and global markets. We talk about Christian's childhood in Guatemala, his first brush with the internet in the 90s, how he started Maestros del Web, a proto-Stack exchange for programmers in Spanish, and grew it to tens of millions of page views per month. We cover his journey to meeting his co-founder, Freddy Vega, to starting Mejorando.la, which morphed later into Platzi, how they were the first Latin American company to get into YCombinator, and how they've grown the business to more than $3 million in revenue with hundreds of thousands of active users. We also talk about the ecosystem in Latin America, his advice to Latin American companies for raising money in the US, why YCombinator was so important, and where he sees the ecosystem going in the future. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Christian. Hello, Christian. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
No, thanks for taking the time to do it. I'm glad we could finally connect to make it happen. So, where are you in the world today?
Today I am in Bogota. We have three main offices. The headquarters, I would say, is Bogota. We have another office in Mexico City, and I run another office, a small one in San Francisco. That's where I live. That's home. But Bogota is where I get more work done because there's a bigger team, and they're always happy to have me around.
So, how would you say you split your time between the three offices?
I mainly work from San Francisco. That's where I'm usually based. I spend 2 to 3 weeks per month in San Francisco. Then I travel to Bogota at least once a month. And every 2 months, I go to Mexico City. In Mexico, we also do their biggest conference. And then lately, I haven't been traveling as much as I wish, but I would say 3 to 4 weeks a year, I go to other places where Platzi also has a big user base.
So, tell me a little bit about Platzi. What do you guys do?
So we do online education. We are teaching people how to code, do design, and online marketing. But the most important thing is that we focus on making online education effective. Because we feel like there are so many platforms and so many projects doing online education, but the results are still not as good. You haven't seen people being hired just by taking online courses, and we want to change that fundamentally.
So, how long have you been working on the business?
We officially launched what we do at Platzi in 2012. We were only doing education in venues all around the world. We toured 20 different cities in Latin America and Spain, teaching people how to code and do HTML5. That was our first course ever. And that evolved into an online platform. And lately, our biggest issue is how do we make sure that people commit and finish the courses? Completion is our biggest challenge. That's our key metric. How many people are finishing the courses that Platzi is producing?
So, I want to jump back into your story before Platzi. How did you end up becoming an entrepreneur? Were you always entrepreneurial as a kid and it was just natural, or were you doing something else and it just hit you that this is a problem that needed solving?
I I was always an entrepreneur, but the funny part is that I learned that I was an entrepreneur uh, almost 10 years ago when I was in Spain doing a master's. Before that, I felt like I was just a webmaster, a web developer who was always curious and wanted to share what he was doing. I had an online forum called Foros del Web. Think of Slack Overflow for Latin America that was quite popular. By 2009, we were having 9 million page views. That was pretty big. We were Alexa top 200 in Spanish. It was a very big website. But at that point, I didn't felt like an entrepreneur. I felt like a web developer sharing at a public community and trying to pay the servers with some AdSense.
And what year did you start Maestros del Web, and how come?
I started in 97, 90, 96, 97, 98. It's a little bit blurry because I was doing a lot of stuff. I was doing some projects for Guatemala. I'm from Guatemala. I was living there. Uh, and I wanted to have a community in Spanish where I could talk about everything that I was doing. And there were no communities in Spanish. There were some blogs and portals. It was more like portals at that time. And I started with a mailing list. I had a mailing list where people could ask questions about how to do web design. And I was struggling with HTML5 and just running a web server. I really was learning by myself, and all the information all the answers were always in English. So I started asking questions in Spanish, and people were helping me. So that's how Maestros del Web started.
And what was it like growing up in Guatemala? You're the second entrepreneur on the podcast that is Guatemalan.
Who was the first one, Luis?
Uh, Kevin Valdez from Group Race. He grew up in Guatemala and left when he was 14 and moved to the U.S.
There are a couple of great entrepreneurs, a bunch of them now living in the US. I would say that unfortunately, Guatemala is one of those countries where it's pretty easy to go to other countries and continue your businesses.
So I was born in Guatemala, and I was lucky enough to go to a private school where I was able to learn English. I also took some German classes. So from my early childhood, I was aware of all these different cultures, and I was very uh, interested in learning more about the rest of the world. And when I have the chance to use the internet, it just caught me off guard. It was like this amazing platform where I could talk to strangers and build stuff. The main story why I actually built a website was because I ended up in Angel Fire GeoCities. Those were like the
I remember those.
yeah, and I was lucky that I was browsing through one of these websites, and Angel Fire just told me, "You want to build your own website?" I did, but then when I needed to change stuff, I needed to do it in HTML. So I learned HTML by myself, and my first web page was about me. I don't know why my ego played that card, but it basically was Christian's page, and it was like, I'm from Guatemala, I'm learning to code. Uh, Help me, and I have some pictures about places that I like in Guatemala. And I started getting a lot of emails from churches in the US, churches in America that wanted me to join them. It's like, hi, you're a Christian, so come and join us and help us build our webpage. So I didn't realize that my name was gonna be so connected in American culture, in US culture, to so many churches. But what I learned from that lesson was like, I should build websites and I should connect with people all around the world. Geographically, the internet allowed me to be a citizen of the world, and I didn't really need it to just hang out with Guatemalans when building and coding. And that was probably the biggest thing that I got out of the internet.
And how did you get interested in the internet in the first place?
Mostly because I was into a lot of American culture. I was watching a lot of movies. I was a typical teenager that was following a lot of American actors, a lot of American musicians, a lot of American movies. I remember at that time, Independence Day, the Will Smith movie was super big, and I went to a computer convention, and over there, what was big was connect to the internet. You can go to websites and learn more about the characters of the movies that you're watching. And I remember that really got me interested. It's like, wow, I can learn so much. I can start learning. I was probably one of those geeks that was in love with Encarta Encyclopedia. I was reading all the articles, and Wikipedia is probably one of the websites that I use more often in my daily life now.
Yeah, so you were in Guatemala working uh, on the internet, seeing it for the first time, connecting with non-Guatemalans. When did you leave, and where did you go?
I wanted to be a teacher. One of the main reasons why we built Platzi and we're in the education market is because both me and my co-founder wanted to be teachers. And at some point, in order to be a teacher at the university where I was working, they asked me for a master's degree. And I needed to get a master's as quick as possible. And I remember I did the research and I needed to complete a couple extra years in my university and then go for the master. It was going to be like a 6, 7 year thing. So I tried to skip all those barriers. I finished one marketing diploma at that university. Then I applied for a master in Spain. I went for the masters, and with that master, I became a teacher. But what also happened is that while being in Spain, I started hanging out with a lot of entrepreneurs, with a lot of bloggers, and everyone was talking about building your own blog, starting your own company. That really got me off guard. I realized that what I really wanted more than being a teacher at a university was to build my own community where I could teach people how to do things on the internet.
What city were you in Spain?
I was in Barcelona. I went to Barcelona. Uh, it's still one of my favorite cities in the world. It has a very important entrepreneurial community, and Catalans are just amazing people, great friends. I really like that part of Europe.
Was this your first time living outside of Guatemala?
Yeah, it was. I had traveled a lot because of my family, but it was the first time that I was also by myself. I was supporting myself. And I remember I was going to the university, but then late at night, I still had to run my business, run Maestros del Web, publish articles, manage a team, try to see how I could do more money, more ad revenue just to pay the bills. So it was a couple of great years.
So by this time, how many people more or less were using Maestros del Web?
Maestros, can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Okay. Uh, 2007, 2009. By that time, we had about 200,000 to 300,000 users subscribed to both our forums or mailing list. We were doing almost 10 million page views of content, and it was managed by myself and a team of 4 people back in an office in Guatemala.
What were some of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome from going from 0 to 10 million page views?
The biggest issue, I didn't really struggle trying to get market fit or growing the community because it was super organic at that point. The biggest issues were really happened with the management. I had a team. I had to do payroll. I had to do evaluations. I had to start running a company, paying taxes, talking to lawyers, doing trademarks. And despite the fact that I learned a lot about that back in college, how to run a business, nobody really prepares you, at least at that time, to run a small business. It usually they tell you how to run a company that already exists, how to become a manager, how to become one of the executives of that company. But how to start it from scratch, it was new horizons for me.
And what was your next step after that? How did you decide to make the jump to uh, going into doing actual education rather than just forums?
My biggest challenge at that time was how to sustain the business because there was an advertisement crisis, and also I my business was growing, but I would say that I didn't really have key metrics at that point. I was just having fun. I was just interacting with this community, getting some ads, and then there was a crash, the 2008-9 crash of advertisements. All of a sudden I went from doing thousands of dollars of ad revenue to doing $100, $200. And all of a sudden I was like, what just happened? I had this business and now it's not working. I wasn't prepared to go to stand a rough patch. And that's when I realized I need bigger goals for this business. And I also need a partner. I cannot do this by myself. So I started looking to do partnerships. I had a couple business partners for other ventures. And then there was Freddy Vega had another community, Crystal Lab. We were competitors, and I like his style. I like what he was building. And one day we had a conversation about doing something together, and that something together was a live streaming. We decided that every week we were gonna talk about technology online. We're gonna post this to YouTube. I think at that point we were using UStream and other media, but we decided, let's have a live show. Let's talk to our communities about tech, and let's see if from there, what are we going to build? So our startup actually started as an experiment of two friends just coming together to try to work together.
And what was that like, going from being a solo founder to teaming up with somebody who also had their own business and probably had their own strong vision of what to do?
I would say that at first it was super weird because I didn't have the last call. There were always like these arguments like, I want to do this, perfect, I want to do this, okay, so what should we do? I don't know, just getting into just trying to decide something, it became more challenging. But at that point I also learned that you need someone to help you to have either a bigger mission. I remember Freddie was super excited about building a course together, but he only wanted to teach 20, 30 people max. It's like, let's have 30 students, let's do courses all around the world. And I remember I was a numbers guy, I was in Excel, I was doing the numbers, and I was like, Freddie, we cannot sustain that business. We need 100 people. And he's like, I don't know how to do 100 people. Well, me neither. Want to try? And we tried it. So it just helped us think bigger because also we needed more cash flow just to sustain the business.
And you guys also made a switch from doing text-based forums to being in front of a camera and being on YouTube and streaming. That's something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with, being out there and being the face of the brand. What was that decision like, and how did you make it?
So going to video was not exactly as complex because we really were doing teaching before. I was a teacher at a couple of universities. So was Freddie. We were doing small conference. We were doing meetups. We were interested in building communities. That was part of our core as people in tech. But I would say that until this day, I'm still feeling nervous before we go to streaming. Even when I'm doing this podcast, it's like, oh my God, is this going right? Am I gonna make mistakes? English is my second language, so despite the fact that I speak it all the time, you always feel like you're gonna mess it up, and you do. But the more you do it, the better you get. So don't worry, just do it. Your first videos, your first recording, they're gonna suck. It's normal. No one it's an expert behind in camera. In their first recording, they always had to do a lot of video, a lot of recordings to lose the nerves and do a great work.
Yeah, I read when I was thinking about starting the podcast, it was the first time doing anything on audio, that I should basically do 5 episodes and not listen to them and launch them. Have someone else edit and launch them and then listen to them. Because if I listen to the first couple, I'd be like, oh, this is so bad, I'm not gonna actually go through with it. And the first 5 are pretty terrible. The guests are great, but my interview style is bad. Make all sorts of very simple mistakes. But yeah, you just have to get over it. And your mistakes are going to be out there, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Until this day, I'm still producing a lot of Spanish speaking content. I'm not doing as much English content as I wish, but the truth is, I build a lot of English content for third parties, people like you who invite me to their podcasts, to their videos, to interviews, to meetups. So at the end, I'm still doing it and just putting the word out there of what you're doing. It's one of the most important things that you should do as an entrepreneur because you're the one who's going to believe more in your projects than anyone else. So just putting the word out, it's half of the plan to launch anything.
So that's another thing that I think especially Latin American entrepreneurs sometimes struggle with, where a lot of people grow up in a culture where you shouldn't it's bad to show off and talk about what you're doing, and you want to sort of keep a low profile. So what kind of advice would you give to people on the importance of it and maybe how to break through from that to start to actually put yourself out there?
The biggest lesson that I got from living in the US is that we Latinos, we don't ask for stuff. We're shy. We feel like we don't deserve stuff. And then you have other nationalities, you have other profiles. They just go and ask. It's like, hi, try my product, buy my product. This is great. You should use it. I have the coolest company in tech in the world. And you always think of myself, it's like, but it isn't. But just by believing in yourself, you're doing a lot of the hard work. And it's challenging, but I always tell people that you have so many things against you when you're building a business. Don't make this another one. At least in this one, you can work hard to change it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So how did the videos morph into actually doing a company and becoming Mejorando.la?
We were doing a course in Mexico City. We had 100 people learning HTML5 with us. And I realized that there were a lot of accents in the crowd. People were flying or taking buses all over Mexico just to be with us. And then we realized it's like Christian is flying, Freddy's flying, all our audience, all our community is flying just to be together and learn. Why are we doing this? We're internet people. Let's do this online. And we also thought, I feel like one of the best strengths that you have as an entrepreneur is being naive. Uh, when you're naive, you think that you can build anything. So we thought, let's build a platform. It should be online. It should have streaming. It should have content projects. So we built it. And after we built it, we invited people. We wanted to have 500 students in our first live course. We had almost 1,200 people in our first live streaming when we were charging for it. And as you can imagine, it blew up. It didn't work. It failed. We had a lot of problems. But it was that pressure and having 1,200 people and just thinking like everyone's going to ask for a refund because this is not working. We made it work. And we apologized and we explained everyone like, okay, this happened. This is how we restarted the server. This is how we launched the course. And because we were being so transparent about everything that was happening, people just loved it. And that's also one of the strengths that Platzi still has. We're super transparent. What we're doing, how we're building it, or problems when they happen and how we're fixing them. And that's something else that also Latinos don't like to do because we don't like to fail. And I feel like if you don't fail, you're not going to win at all.
So why did you decide to rebrand after a couple of years from Mejorando.la to Platzi?
I really like the brand Mejorando.la. A lot of people still tell me that it was a great brand. But unfortunately, it was limiting us. First, because at first it was Mejorando.la Web. So we were improving the web. So it would limit us just to do courses, technical courses into web development. And second, when we were in the US, we were one of the first companies targeting the Spanish communities to get into YCombinator. I remember talking to everyone about Mejorando.la, and they were like, what does that mean? What's the name? So Freddy thought about a name that was more original and that we could imprint or DNA, and that was Platzi. We rebranded, and the most interesting part was that we were super afraid. It's like people won't use the website, they would hate us, they would criticize the name, but it actually worked. One of the biggest things that you learn as an entrepreneur is like people don't really care about your branding when you're starting. They care about your product. Until this day, people care that we do great courses, that they learn more than what's the company name, I felt.
And what made you decide to target the Latin American market and then also the Spanish-speaking market in the US?
At first, it was more of the market that we knew, or community. We had those users and we could ask. I'm a strong believer that you should always talk to your users and ask them what they want. And that was the community that we had access to. We still have a large community in Latin America, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, Chile. We're big believers that just asking your community what they want, what they're looking for, it's the biggest way to develop your product. We're also starting to target other markets. Some of our English courses were big in other markets. We did some courses with YCombinator that had a lot of traffic in Russia, in Japan. And it was amazing when you are building a company from Latin America and all of a sudden you go to Google Analytics and you see the world view and there are dots of users using your product in countries that you don't really know much about.
So you mentioned Y Combinator a couple of times. Tell me about that process. How did you get in being from Latin America? And were you one of the first, if not the first companies from LATAM to get into YC?
We were definitely the first company targeting Latinos in YC. There's a couple of US Hispanics and a couple of other Latin Americas that were part of our batch. And doing YC was interesting for us because I was a big user of Hacker News, and I was reading Paul Graham's essays, and I really believed in that community. And one day I realized that I could apply to YC as a founder. I did. We were rejected the first time that we applied. And then someone from the US told me, are you going to keep insistent? Are you going to apply again? And it was kind of interesting because I wasn't. I felt like I failed. I shouldn't. They already told me that my project is not good enough. But this guy made me realize that if you really want something, you need to keep trying. You don't have to give up if you really believe in what you're building.
So what was the experience like, and what year was this?
We applied for YC in 2014, were rejected, and then we reapplied in 2015. We were part of the batch of Winter 15. And the most important thing is our batch was really supportive, and we also managed to understand Silicon Valley. I always said that YC, it's like the handbook of how to do businesses in Silicon Valley. They give you a lot of advice, and they build a great community of entrepreneurs. They're the main reason why we got our first round of funding. And I would always recommend any entrepreneur in the world to apply to YC. Even if you don't get accepted, just the exercise, it's great to figure out if what you're building is worth it.
What were some of the biggest surprises that you learned when you were in the program?
I realized that I wasn't thinking big enough. At some point, I would talk to some of the partners about I want to build this. And they're like, oh, small company. Why don't you think bigger? So they will always let me know when I wasn't really thinking big. And second, they show me how to ask for stuff. Christian, if you want to do this, just call the guy who knows how to do it and ask if they want to help. You need to sell. So that was also super valuable. I remember at some point, we were learning how to pitch to an investor, and they just got us an amazing investor into the room. And it's like, perfect. You want to learn how to talk to an investor? Here's a very famous investor. Talk to him. And that's it. We learn by doing.
How much of the value of the program while you were in it was the partners versus the other teams that were in the program with you?
The biggest value so far are other entrepreneurs. They are my friends. They are my community. When I do something right, they celebrate with me. When something is in trouble, they will help me out. Some of them help me get some of our most important investors. Some of them have tried the product. I have friends that don't even speak Spanish, and they try everything that we do. It's like, Christian, this doesn't work. And this, I don't know if it's what you're trying to do here. I don't understand the Spanish, but you should change this color and whatever. So that community is the biggest thing that we got out of the program.
And it seems like the country with the most YC companies from LATAM is Colombia. I could be wrong on that, but from what I've seen, it seems like that's true. There's the first one from Chile just happened. One of the first couple from Argentina just happened. Puerto Rico. Why do you think Colombia is leading the way?
I got to meet amazing entrepreneurs from Colombia, and I have to admit that they're really working super hard. They are learning to sell. They are putting their name out there. We have some of the most amazing companies right now, I feel, here in Latin America, like Rappi, who raised a big round in the US. A lot of companies here in Colombia also had uh, founders from different nationalities. So they're not all Colombians. What's happening in Platzi that you have a Colombian founder and a Guatemalan founder, it's also happening in other companies. There are French people, there are people from the US here. So it's also a country that is very welcoming to foreigners. And second, Colombians right now are not afraid of the rest of Latin America. They will set up shop here and then build another office in Mexico, in Argentina, in Brazil. They're up for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just in Colombia for the last 6 weeks or so, and I think you're right. I think the interesting mix of geography being basically 5 hours from anywhere in the US, and also 5 hours to Chile, a little shorter to Peru, to Mexico. It's got a lot of different people from a lot of different places, and I think entrepreneurs are starting to see the first success stories like Rappi and companies like you guys to take as role models. So I think it's a really interesting place right now.
Yes, and we're going to try to keep it growing as much as possible.
So for you guys, what was the inflection point from when you knew that this could be, maybe a small business that does a couple hundred people per class or per month into what it is today?
I feel like we always thought of Platzi as a global company, and we're still struggling to build that. So I would pitch someone in the US or someone from Japan, Platzi, as if we were already as big as we are in Latin America. Well, I always tell them about the courses, what we're building, what I'm trying to approach. I try to get teachers and students from all over. But the inflection point, I feel, happened during YC when we got funding. We were a bootstrap company. We did our first $1 million of sales without no investments. And with funding, we just thought like, wow, now this company belongs to more people. We also have we are one of the companies that it's doing option pool for Latin America, which I feel it's very important to really share the success of what you're building. And I feel like because we established those ground rules, it's easier for us to just think about the big company that we're going to build. And by living in San Francisco, I struggle every day. I come here to Colombia, and a lot of people know about Platzi. A lot of people recognize what we're doing. They tell me that it's great, that we're successful. And I always tell them it's like, we're not. We're just getting started. Education, it's a long ride. And I also feel like education is going to be my life's work. Platzi is just part of what I'm going to build in the education market, because I feel like the opportunity is huge and there aren't as many companies as they should.
Can you share a little bit about the metrics in Platzi today? How many students and whatever you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, sure. So we have registered users because we also have a lot of free courses where you can learn online marketing and programming for free in our course. We're gonna target 600,000 registered users in our platform. We have anywhere from 100 to 200,000 users active on the platform at any given time on our courses. We also create a lot of content freely available. In our YouTube channel, we have videos that have over 200, 300,000 viewers. Every time we post anything to YouTube, we get 10 to 20,000 views. We're on track to sell over $3 million per year. And we built that in the last 4 years. And most importantly, we are present in all the biggest markets that speak Spanish, and people recognize our brand, even on top of other great projects from the US that have a more global approach.
Yeah, that's really great what you've been able to build. And so one thing that I think is interesting is that you have the office in San Francisco. Can you talk about the decision to keep the office there and why that might be important for other startups that maybe start in Latin America but want to target a global market?
I believe that some of the smartest VCs, the smartest mentors, and the smartest entrepreneurs hang out in San Francisco. I'm a firm believer that Silicon Valley, it's not going to be the center of the tech world. I don't believe it is at this point. When you talk about crypto, there's so many startups happening all around the world. But the density of smart people of San Francisco and Silicon Valley, it's super high. In any given place, you're going to be talking about startups. That's the bless and the curse about Silicon Valley. If you hang out over there for a while, you get tired that we're only talking about the tech world. We're only talking about startups. But because I have the benefit of traveling a lot and spending so much time outside of that bubble, I just get to nurture myself from all these great mentors, all these great investors. And the other thing is getting funding from Silicon Valley. It's hard when you're not actually running the business close to some of the investors. They have a bunch of startups that they need to follow up. And when you're close, it's also easier for you to get that funding. It's changing. A lot of companies are running outside of Silicon Valley, but that helps. So I'm there because of the people. I'm there because of the culture. I'm learned because I'm just hanging out with amazing people. But also a lot of tech, a lot of stuff that we're teaching on Platzi is still being built in Silicon Valley.
So raising money as a Latin American company or a Latin American entrepreneur is one of the harder things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have to overcome in LATAM. Besides for location in San Francisco, what advice would you give to other founders when they're trying to raise money?
You're definitely going to have to try harder. You're selling a business with metrics that probably are different to other models. We didn't really have a comparison point when we were building some of our numbers. But you just have to be pretty clever and learn with other entrepreneurs. My biggest advice is I learned from a bunch of foreign entrepreneurs. I wouldn't say that I got the funding and I got to where I got because of other Latinos, but by other foreigners. And the majority of entrepreneurs at this point in Silicon Valley, I believe, are foreigners. So it's really opening up because there are so many companies in Colombia and in Mexico now getting funding from the US. More and more VC money, it's going to come our way. But we need to take that capital and just make it work, make our businesses grow. And in California, in Silicon Valley, trying is the most important thing. You can fail, but if you play harder and you really did your homework, there's definitely going to be new opportunities for you.
So flipping that question around, there has been, I think, an inflection point where, like you said, Mexico and Colombia are getting a lot more US VC. But why should more US VCs be looking at companies from LATAM?
There's definitely a larger market of users in Latin America. We are getting a bunch of more internet access, better internet access, more tech savvy people, more people who are able to pay with a credit card and online service. So the numbers of growth for new ideas in Latin America are going to be big. And also, businesses that are already happening in the US that could be implemented in Latin America have a big opportunity. But there's another business that I actually like, and are projects that already tried to happen in the US were not as successful and maybe will have their largest markets and their largest margins in Latin America. This has happened in Asia, this has happened in India, and I feel like Latin America is another big market for these kind of opportunities.
What kind of companies, do you have any examples of that? So maybe Rappi is one, but other than that, what are some of the other ones that you think could be interesting?
I believe that, delivery is going to be a huge market. Transportation is definitely going to be another big opportunity, despite the fact that we already have some of the biggest players here. I feel like entertainment is also going to be big. Netflix is doing a great work, but I feel like there's an opportunity to just build our own content, like it has happened in India, for example. And I really believe in fintech, because if we solve fintech, if we allow everyone in Latin America to access the internet and have a payment system, that's when the biggest opportunity is going to happen. Uh, Everyone's getting a cell phone, a smartphone in Latin America. Everyone's using WhatsApp, Facebook, Netflix, Google, all these big companies. But the infrastructure, when everyone's online and everyone's able to do transactions, that's when we can become as big of as large of a market. Something that's happening right now in China with its own rules, restrictions, and infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on, especially about fintech, because it unlocks the potential of, depending on the country, anywhere between 50 and 80% of the population that currently just doesn't have access to the same sort of financial system that people from the US or Europe would become accustomed to. And I think you're right about China. We've taken a lot of look at where China was, say, 8 to 10 years ago, and it's very similar to where Latin America is in terms of people that don't have a credit score. A lot of people don't have access to a formal bank account. Lots of loans are high priced and informal from someone who's not a traditional money lender. So I think that you can look to China and see a lot of the ways that the Latin America fintech system could potentially evolve.
Yeah, and I feel like we're going to see a lot of struggle in the fintech. A lot of companies are starting and failing in Latin America, but I wish we had more entrepreneurs just trying, because some of them are actually going to be the ones who solve it. Starting a business, it's about passion, but being successful is about doing a lot of experiments, being consistent, persevering, and having a lot of luck. So the more people who try, the more wins we're probably going to have in that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's right. So talking about persevering and going forward, what's in the plans for you and Platzi going forward over the next, say, 6 to 12 months?
Right now we're launching almost 20 to 30 new courses per month. But by the end of the year, we're probably going to be doing 50. There's going to be more content in English. We're also trying new courses in Portuguese. I feel like just connecting some of the content that we have in English to that market could be huge. And I also want to help companies recruit better talent. I feel like we're having a crisis by getting developers, getting a CTO for your own startup. And great developers are also looking for better paying jobs in Latin America and in Spain. So I want Platzi to use its community of students to bring those opportunities to a lot of people. So we're going to be launching a couple of new products in those areas.
So for a lot of people that are maybe thinking about starting to code, or maybe have some very basics but want to level up so that they can get a good job at a startup, what's your advice for those people? Where should they start?
We have an online course that it's free about programming. Take that course. Build your own project. Build your own MVP. I feel like in order to start new businesses and just to build stuff, you need to learn how to do things quickly, and you need to learn to iterate. And also you need to learn to just launch things that are still broken, because that's how businesses start. Twitter gave us the fail whale for several years before it became what it is right now. YouTube had a lot of issues when you were trying to upload videos at first. And Platzi had issues when we launched our first online course. So don't be afraid of failing. Just do it, try it, repeat, and eventually you're going to become good at it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So speaking of advice, if you could go back to when you were first starting Mejorando.la and knowing what you know today, what advice would you give yourself?
I would launch faster. I would think bigger from the early beginnings, and I would definitely ask for help more often. When I was starting, I was so shy, and I felt like doing the wrong or the dumb questions was gonna make me look bad. And you're always gonna learn. You're always gonna do dumb questions. There's always gonna be someone else who knows more than you or better than you. You better start talking to them now and asking them questions, because the entrepreneur world is really helps each other, and nobody feels like there are dumb questions. People will just help you. And Latin America needs a couple hundred or thousand more entrepreneurs. So if you want to build your own company, today is a good time to start. And if I can help, I'm available. Find me on Twitter, find me on Platzi. We're really happy to help.
Well, Christian, thank you very much for taking the time to do the podcast. Really appreciate you sharing your story. And I definitely invite anyone who's listening to reach out and ask for help, because you guys have been showing a big example to the LATAM ecosystem. And I think you guys are going to have a lot more success going forward. So thanks again.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks for the podcast. And I'm also looking forward for hearing other entrepreneurs in it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders. Christian's story is really inspiring, and he continues to lead the way in Latin America, paving the way for other entrepreneurs to find success and move to the US market. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know on social media and share it with a friend. Thanks again to Angel and Sofia for helping make this episode happen, and thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day. We'll make it happen. So yeah, Angel, we're sorry for this.
We love you, Angel. You're a master if you can deal with this.
Yeah, if he can, he'll do a good job.